Rachel and her son Cole walked up the steps to their cozy home, arms laden with shopping bags. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow on the sidewalk. Rachel fumbled with her keys, trying to find the right one. Impatiently, Cole grabbed the doorknob and turned it, hoping it would lock. Surprisingly, the door swung open. Rachel frowned in confusion. "This is weird," she muttered to herself. John must have come home early today. After setting the groceries on the kitchen counter, Rachel decided she deserved a few moments to relax in the living room before starting dinner. However, as she entered the living room, her steps faltered. On the couch sat her husband John, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman Rachel had never seen before. Their quiet laughter filled the room. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. Her mind racing, she managed to say, "Excuse me," her voice steady despite her shock. "What the hell is going on here?" The mysterious woman looked up, a smile playing on her lips, barely hiding a chuckle. There was a smugness about it that Rachel didn't like. John, however, remained seated, his expression unreadable. A storm of emotions raged inside Rachel. Her heart pounded, a sensation she hadn't felt before. She stood there, waiting for an explanation, hoping against hope that this was some bizarre prank. Time seemed to stretch forever as she waited for John to react. Finally, he stood, his serious face meeting Rachel's eyes directly. The look on his face confirmed her fears. This was no joke. Rachel stood frozen, her eyes fixed on John as he introduced the woman sitting next to him with a casualness that cut her deeply. "Rachel, this is my girlfriend, Nicole. And this is my soon-to-be ex-wife, Rachel," John said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Rachel's mind reeled, unable to comprehend the full scope of what was happening. "Wait, I don't understand," she began, her voice shaking with disbelief and hurt. "So, you're telling me you brought your girlfriend into our home?" John interrupted sharply. "My home, Rachel. It's my home. And look, I tried to make this work and I clearly failed. I'm sorry, but we have to move on." Those words echoed in Rachel's mind as she tried to process the betrayal and brutality of the situation. She stood there, paralyzed, feeling like her world was crumbling around her. He stated, his smile forced and empty. The words hit Rachel like a physical blow, and her heart skipped a beat. The shock of the betrayal was as devastating as losing a beloved family member. She struggled to understand how everything had changed so quickly. Just yesterday, they had been laughing together, sharing moments of joy. Confusion clouded her thoughts. "How long has this been going on?" she managed to ask, her voice a mix of anger and sadness. John sighed heavily, his expression sour as he faced Rachel's questioning. "This has been going on for a while," he admitted reluctantly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rachel pressed, needing answers, her voice rising with each word. John's irritation became apparent. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly not liking the direction the conversation was going. "Rachel, this is not the time or place to discuss this," he said dismissively, trying to end the conversation. Rachel tried to speak, her voice wavering with emotion. "Who is she and how can you just stand there unaffected?" she asked, her eyes darting between John and the woman beside him. Nicole opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say a word, John intervened. He turned to Nicole, his hands tightening on her waist as he stared straight at Rachel. His voice was icy, each word deliberate and cutting. "Rachel, you had your chance. You didn't meet my expectations," he stated bluntly. "Nicole can provide what I needed." The harshness of his words was like a slap across Rachel's face. She stood there, frozen, trying to process the brutality of the situation, feeling as if her world was crumbling around her. Every moment that passed was a struggle to maintain her composure as the reality of her new life began to unfold before her. Leaving her reeling from the cold rejection, Rachel tried to comprehend the abrupt end to their relationship. I don't understand, John. After all these years together, how can you say that? What am I supposed to tell Cole? Her voice was shaking, on the verge of tears. John's response was cold and dismissive. Tell him whatever you think is best. I'm not his father, Rachel. What kind of question is that? He snapped, his anger rising. John, do you really hear what you're saying? Can you hear the cruelty in your words? Rachel pleaded, tears already streaming down her cheeks. John closed his eyes in disgust. Oh, come on, Rachel. Are you trying to make me feel guilty about Cole now? He's not my blood. He would never be my son. How can you be so naive? He snapped harshly. Rachel stood there, sobbing softly, her head in despair. I have no interest in your life anymore. To please you, John, she began, but was cut off by John's blank stare. Unseen until now, 7-year-old Cole had heard everything. When Rachel turned, she saw her son peering around the corner. Her attempt at a smile did little to mask the tears brimming in her eyes. Baby, Rachel's voice broke as he walked into her arms. I'm so sorry, baby. John cleared his throat loudly, interrupting the tender moment. Sorry to interrupt your emotional moment, but you need to pack your bags now, he said. Rachel looked at John through her tears, stunned. What do you mean, John? We have nowhere else to go. Can't you give us a little time? She pleaded, her embrace tightening around her son. This is over, Rachel. If you try hard, maybe you can find a place to go. Like that old shack you inherited, John said mercilessly. Rachel gasped softly, taking a step back as the gears in her head began to turn, desperately trying to find a solution amidst the overwhelming pain. To work, her path became clearer at that point, and she finally understood who the man before her was. Without saying a word, she turned on her heel, holding her son's hand as she headed for the room they shared. Go get your things, Cole, she said, trying to remain calm. Where are we going, Mom? Cole asked, smiling hesitantly, but his eyes were filled with tears. Rachel swallowed hard, looking away from the boy who was looking at her innocently. We'll be fine, honey. Go get your things. As soon as she heard the soft click of the door, she collapsed on the floor. It all felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She lay there, sobbing and remembering how it all began. It was hard for her to even think about getting married again after the death of her first husband. No man seemed to treat her well until John showed up. It was a warm summer night, and she was attending a friend's birthday party. She was initially hesitant to go because of Cole, but her friend's insistence finally convinced her. He was the first person she saw when she entered the garden. John was tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. He walked up to her with a smile on his face. John was charming and witty, making her laugh easily for the first time in a year and a half. She remembered the way her heart skipped a beat when he took her hand and the way his smile made her feel at home. They danced under the stars that night, swaying gently to the music, their eyes locked on each other. It was as if time had stopped and all that mattered was the two of them. When the night was over, he walked her to her car and they exchanged numbers. Later, he asked her out on a proper date. She remembered feeling like she was walking on air. However, that didn't last long, as she realized she had never told him about her son. After 2 dates, she plucked up the courage to tell him everything about her son and his inheritance. Looking back now, she knew she should have been more careful when he quickly dismissed this information, telling her he loved her. She ignored all the warning signs, trying to convince herself that the love they shared was genuine. It all culminated on the day they went to check out the house she had inherited. Dad, she couldn't help but remember how disgusted he'd looked when they'd gotten there. It wasn't what either of them had expected, but he looked more heartbroken and angry. It was the same man who had been so loving and kind, now holding another woman in his arms. His laughter drifted up to their room, breaking Rachel's heart. She never would have guessed that all her now ex-husband had wanted was her inheritance. Everything he'd done had been a complete lie. "How did I not realize this before?" she whimpered, trying to get up. She couldn't take it anymore. She had to do what she was told. Rachel's memories turned to bitter resentment as she stormed into his room, throwing open the closet door with a force that sent hangers tumbling to the floor. She began to throw clothes into her suitcase in anger. She couldn't believe she'd wasted years on John's lies and deceit. As she packed, her head raced with all the signs she'd ignored. She'd made excuses for his behavior. Her anger and hurt showed in the fierce way she stuffed her clothes into her bag, as if trying to squeeze out all the pain and betrayal. Just as she was about to zip up her suitcase, a small voice interrupted her tumultuous thoughts. Cole's hesitant tone broke through her fury, and she turned to see her son standing in the doorway, his backpack slung over his shoulder and another suitcase beside him. "It's okay, baby, I'm ready." She zipped up the suitcase, moving toward the door. They left the house, and it took all her willpower not to look back. Rachel pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind the house where she and Cole had spent 4 years. The silence in the car continued to grow, punctuated only by Cole's occasional sniffles. Her heart ached, knowing that her son was hurting just as much as she was, and that there was nothing she could do to ease that pain. "Are we ever going to go home again?" Cole finally asked, shaking a little. Rachel took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "John and I are having some problems, buddy. We need to get away for a while." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "He wasn't being honest with us, Cole. He was hurting us, and it was best for us to get out." "Is leaving because of her?" Cole asked, his eyes narrowing as he glanced at her in the rear-view mirror. Rachel noticed her face was pale, her heart skipping a beat. "Yeah, honey, it's because of her," she replied softly. "But we'll get through this together, okay? We'll build a better life, just the two of us." As they drove down the streets, Rachel started pointing out the houses in the new area they were moving to, trying to cheer Cole up. "Remember the place I told you your grandpa left us?" Cole nodded slightly, looking out the window. "That's where we're staying. It'll be fun." Not long after, the house John had referred to as an old shack came into view. Rachel knew it wasn't much, but it was a great place to start over, a place to heal. She pulled into the garage and turned off the engine. "We're here, buddy," she said with a smile on her face. "Let's go in and take care of the place. What do you think?" "I ordered chicken and fries, too." Cole looked straight into her eyes, as if he were examining her deeply. "My favorite," he said as he got out of the car and walked up the steps. Rachel knew her son wanted to say more, but she decided not to press him. He was so much like his father in so many ways, and for the first time that day, she was grateful that Cole wasn't John's biological son. Rachel walked into the house next to Cole, who was looking around at the spacious interior. The house was larger than it looked from the outside, with high ceilings and large windows that let in plenty of light. It was clear that John had been wrong to call it a shack. Despite being a mess, with dust and cobwebs covering every surface, it was still a sturdy house. "Well, buddy, looks like we've got a lot of work to do," Rachel said, rolling up her sleeves. Cole nodded, still looking around. "Let me check the attic and see what we can use. There should be a vacuum cleaner somewhere." "Just be careful, buddy," she called, watching him climb up to the attic. He emerged back into the living room less than 5 minutes later. Together, they began cleaning the house from top to bottom. They dusted, vacuumed, mopped the floors, and wiped down the counters. Rachel showed Cole how to use a mop and how to clean the windows. Before she could respond, Rachel apologized. "I apologize for bothering you. We just moved in next door, and we're in dire need of an axe." The woman shook her head slowly. I don't have one, but come on in. Don't stand out here in the cold. You'll freeze to death. She stepped aside, revealing a cozy living room behind her. Rachel hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of entering a stranger's home, but Cole's shivering beside her made her reconsider. She couldn't let him suffer in the cold, even if she could handle the cold herself. With a silent nod, she took Cole's hand and walked into the house. The warmth that enveloped them as soon as they entered was exactly what they needed. A fire crackled in the fireplace, casting a soft glow in the room. Rachel glanced at the woman, noting how she looked like an older version of her own mother, but with a charm that only time could bring. The house was as charming as the woman, its walls decorated with hand-drawn drawings that Rachel suspected were the work of a child. A delicious aroma of something baking hung in the oven. Rachel felt a pang of envy, wishing her own home could be as welcoming. They sat by the fireplace, where the woman handed them steaming cups, tea for Rachel and hot chocolate for Cole, his favorite. I'm Elaine. I didn't catch your name, the woman said kindly. Rachel, embarrassed, replied, Pardon my manners. I'm Rachel and this is my son, Cole. She glanced at Cole, who was busy with his hot chocolate. Oh, don't worry, Rachel. I don't bite, Elaine said with a warm smile. Rachel's cheeks flushed, but she felt a warm calm. Elaine leaned forward, interested. Tell me, where do you come from? What brought you to this old house? I thought it was abandoned, since no one had checked in a while, Elaine said, taking a sip of her tea. Rachel looked down. It wasn't abandoned, she said, not elaborating, though she knew Elaine wanted to hear more. I see. Well, it seems you're not just passing through, you're staying for a while, right? Elaine observed. Rachel nodded, relief washing over her. At first, she had been afraid Elaine would continue with her questions, but there was something about her presence that made her feel at ease, despite her initial reservations. Her mind wandered to the events of the previous day, and she wondered what John was doing now. He was probably with another woman, someone he had found to replace her. A sad smile formed on her lips. It was better than crying again. She was so lost in her own thoughts that she didn't notice Elaine's attempts to get her attention. It wasn't until she felt a gentle touch on her arm that she came back to reality. Rachel, honey, I was calling your name, Elaine said softly with a smile. I have spare rooms upstairs and you two are welcome to stay the night. In the morning, I'll call someone to come and do the repairs on your place. Rachel felt a wave of gratitude and relief. Thank you so much, Elaine. You don't know how much this means to us. You're welcome, honey. We all need a helping hand now and then, Elaine replied as Rachel held Cole's hand, feeling for the first time in a long time that everything was going to be okay. What brought you to this old house? I thought it was abandoned, since no one had been checking it out in ages, Elaine asked, taking a sip of her tea. Rachel looked down. It wasn't abandoned, she replied, not elaborating, though she could tell Elaine wanted to know more. Oh, I see. It seems you're not just passing through. You're staying for a while, right? Elaine observed. Rachel nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. At first, she was afraid Elaine would continue with her questions, but there was something about her presence that made her feel at ease, despite her reservations. Her mind wandered to the events of the previous day, and she wondered what John was doing now. He was probably with another woman, someone he had found to replace her. A sad smile formed on her lips. It was better than crying again. She was so lost in her own thoughts that she didn't notice Elaine's attempts to get her attention. It wasn't until she felt a gentle touch on her arm that she came back to reality. Rachel, honey, I was calling your name, Elaine said softly with a smile. I have spare rooms upstairs, and you're both welcome to stay the night. In the morning, I'll call someone to come and do the repairs on your house. Rachel's instincts kicked in, and she shook her head. No, Elaine, you've done enough. We can't impose on you like this. You're not imposing, I want to help. Besides, it's not safe to go back to that cold, dark house tonight, Elaine insisted. Rachel hesitated, taken aback by Elaine's offer. She didn't want to be a burden. Really, Elaine, we'll be fine. We can. Elaine's hand on her arm stopped her. Hey, you're not going back to that house tonight. You're going to stay here, where it's warm and safe. In the morning, we'll fix your house, and you can get back to your life. But for now, accept my help, okay? Rachel's resistance crumbled under Elaine's persistence. Seeing that Elaine wouldn't take no for an answer, Rachel finally agreed. Okay, thanks, Elaine. Rachel bundled up and headed back to her house, surprised at how cold it suddenly was. She quickly gathered a few essential clothes, toiletries, and Cole's blanket, and headed back to Elaine's house. When she walked in, she saw Cole fast asleep on the couch, his small chest rising and falling with each breath. Elaine smiled and waved toward the stairs. Let me show you the bedrooms. Rachel followed, carrying her things as her eyes adjusted to the dim light of the upstairs hallway. The same decorations seen in the living room continued down the hallway, giving the room a warm, homey feel. This time, he seemed more mature. Elaine showed them 2 rooms, one next to the other. Rachel quickly put Cole, who was mumbling something in his sleep, to bed and covered him with his blanket. However, as she looked at her sleeping son, she felt a growing unease. She didn't want to sleep alone tonight, especially after such a tumultuous day. As if sensing her hesitation, Elaine remained near the door. You know, Rachel, you're welcome to share Cole's room if you want. I know what it can be like for mothers and their children. Rachel's eyes met Elaine's, wondering if she was so easy to read or if Elaine had that sixth sense. Thanks, Elaine. I think I'll do that. It took a few hours before Rachel finally fell asleep. Before she could shake off reality, tears fell from her eyes, both from gratitude and shock. At least, in the midst of everything that had happened, she wasn't completely alone. The next day, Rachel stood in a cold, dimly lit room, watching her son, Kevin, inspect the old furnace. His rugged features looked like they were carved from granite, with a sharp, unyielding jaw. His eyes, a deep shade of blue, were fixed on the metal machine before him. At first, Rachel mistook him for a handyman until Elaine introduced him as her son and the person who would be handling the repairs. Elaine also mentioned that he was a fireman. The furnace was a hulking mass of dust and decay, long dormant, covered in cobwebs and a thick layer of dust. Rachel wondered how it still worked. That thing is a relic. I'm surprised it didn't blow up the whole house, Kevin said. Thank God my mom didn't have an axe. Rachel, standing next to him, felt suddenly defensive. Hey, it's not that bad. It just needs a little care. This thing needs a miracle or a wrecking ball, he grumbled, shaking his head. Well, it's not like I have a choice. It came with the house, Rachel snapped. Kevin huffed, making her want to scream in frustration. Yeah, well, the previous owner probably wanted to get rid of it along with the rest of this junk. Hey, this house has character, and it's not a dump. Her eyes bored into the back of his head. If looks could kill, he would have disappeared long ago. Personality? You mean like the leaky roof and the creaky floors? Yeah, really charming. Elaine cleared her throat loudly, interrupting the pair. Kevin, honey, that's enough. Rachel, why don't you help me with lunch? Cole will be home soon and you haven't even done your grocery shopping yet. Without another word, Rachel calmed down, knowing it was childish to throw a tantrum. But once she got out of the house, she could start to shed the weight of the previous day. Rachel could swear he had mumbled something irritating about her. How was she to know that the person Elaine had mentioned as help was actually her 35-year-old son? He was only 5 years older than her, but he looked much older and, annoyingly, very handsome. Despite being insufferable, he was not worth her time and attention. Elaine was already doing enough by providing a roof over her head and her son's head. Without Elaine, Rachel couldn't imagine how she would have managed to get Cole ready for school in a house that needed so much repair. Cole was growing up fast. That morning, he had said, chin held high, that he could take care of himself in the bathroom. Just 3 years ago, he had still been crying, waiting for her to do everything for him. Rachel walked into the warm kitchen, letting the aroma of freshly baked bread envelop her. Elaine was at the counter, adding spices to the stew. Rachel joined her, wanting to be of service. "I grew up an only child," Elaine began, turning toward the window, where she could see Rachel's house. "My parents were older and lavished all their love and attention on me. But sometimes I felt so alone. I longed for a sibling to share my secrets with, play with, and even fight with." Rachel paused, wondering what had prompted Elaine to suddenly talk about her childhood. "But then I met my husband," Elaine continued, "and he became my everything. We had Kevin, and our little family felt complete. Or so we thought. We wanted more children, but life had other plans. My husband passed away, and I was left alone with only Kevin to care for. It broke my heart, thinking that I would never experience the joy of motherhood again." Rachel could relate to some of what Elaine was saying. "I'm sorry about that," she said. "Oh, it's nothing," Elaine replied. "It's just that seeing how you and Kevin interacted before, it made me wonder what the house would be like if I had another child." Before Rachel could respond, the kitchen door opened and Cole walked in, his backpack slung over his shoulder and an excited smile on his face. "Hey, Mom, guess what? We did a science experiment today and it was so cool. We made a volcano erupt. And in gym class, I scored a goal. Oh, and I forgot to tell you that I got an A on my math test." Elaine's face immediately lit up and she wrapped Cole in a hug. "That's amazing, honey. I'm so proud of you." Kevin walked into the kitchen at that moment, sniffing the air before letting out a sigh. His eyes landed on Cole, who was watching him curiously. A smile played on his lips as he approached Cole. "Hey, little man," Kevin said. Cole's eyes slowly widened as he took in Kevin's towering figure. "Wow, you're huge." "Yeah, I hear that a lot," Kevin chuckled, shrugging at the statement. Rachel walked over to her son, holding him by the shoulders. "Cole, that's not a polite thing to say. Apologize to Kevin." Cole's face flushed, and he looked down at his feet. "Sorry," he mumbled. "Don't worry, little man. I'm used to it," Kevin replied, smiling. Rachel smiled back, her eyes meeting Kevin's in a brief moment of understanding. "Well, let's go get some lunch, shall we? Cole, why don't you go wash your hands and we'll get started?" Cole hurried off, and Rachel turned to Kevin. "Sorry about that. He can be a little overenthusiastic sometimes." "Like I said, I'm used to it. The kids are always curious about the big, scary fireman," Kevin replied with a smile that revealed a softer side to his personality. The next few weeks passed quickly, like a bolt from the blue. Rachel did her best to keep herself busy when Cole wasn't around, and Elaine often kept her company. On one such occasion, Rachel burst into tears as she remembered what her ex-husband had done, but Elaine simply held her without asking questions. The words were on the tip of her tongue, ready to tell Elaine about her cheating husband and the newly served divorce papers, but Rachel never said them, and Elaine didn't press. A few days later, Rachel picked up the dishes she had borrowed from Elaine and went out to return them, making a mental note to buy new cookware. Cole would be back soon, so she needed to be quick. As she locked the door and turned around, she noticed an exotic car pulling up to Elaine's driveway. A young woman, who looked younger than Cole, jumped out of the car and waved eagerly at the driver before running into the house. Rachel became even more curious when Kevin appeared out of nowhere, standing near the gate as if waiting for the driver to notice him. It was then that a stunning woman with long, silky dark hair stepped out of the car, looking a little flushed. Kevin and the woman began to talk in low tones, and Rachel could tell by the creases in Kevin's forehead that something important was being discussed. She suspected they were arguing, but she was too far away to make out what they were saying. Not that it was any of her business, after all. The man made a point of irritating her whenever he saw her. Feeling like an intruder, she hesitated, unsure whether to wait and return the dishes later or continue now. The woman stormed off, leaving Kevin standing alone near the gate, his eyes still fixed on the car as it drove away. Kevin ran his hands through his hair in frustration, and as he turned to go back into the house, his eyes met hers. He nodded briefly before going inside. Rachel didn't need any further prompting to decide to postpone delivering the dishes to Elaine until another time. She wondered why Kevin's eyes flashed with anger, seeming more intense than the emotion itself. 2 days later, Rachel could no longer avoid going to Elaine's house. Cole brought questions about Elaine, whom he now saw as a grandmother. She knocked twice before the door opened, and the little girl she had seen earlier stood before her, smiling. "Hi, I'm Anna," the girl said. Rachel couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. It was then that she saw Elaine standing behind Anna. "I haven't seen you in a while." "This is Anna, Kevin's daughter," Elaine said. Rachel's smile froze as she processed the introduction. She hadn't expected it, but it explained the uncanny resemblance between Kevin and the little girl. Before, she had seen him as rude and annoying, but now, knowing he had a daughter, she began to see him differently. Walking to the kitchen to put the dishes away, she muttered to herself, "Kevin's daughter." "That's right, my girl," Elaine said. Rachel turned to see Kevin standing in the doorway, looking at her with amusement. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "Wow, I didn't know you were a dad," she said, looking away. Kevin raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises." Rachel muttered to herself as she walked over to him, "You're so rude and intimidating." He placed his hand on the doorframe, blocking her path. "Rude and intimidating? That's not exactly the kind of language I'd use to describe myself." "Well, you have to admit you can be a little scary sometimes." "Scary? Me? Never." She couldn't help but laugh, clapping her hand over her mouth. "Oh, come on. You're like a big, tough firefighter. I'm sure you have a soft spot in there somewhere. Don't get any ideas about me being soft, you know? I'm all tough and rough around the edges." "Yeah, right. That's why you have such a cute daughter who looks so much like you, a total softie." Kevin's face turned red and he looked away, muttering under his breath, "Shut up, Rachel." "What's wrong, fireman? Can't handle a little teasing?" Rachel laughed. Elaine patted her son's arm, making him reluctantly pull away. "Enough playing around, you two. Kevin, why don't you take Rachel and Cole to the park with Anna? She doesn't want to be alone." Kevin started to protest, but stopped halfway. "I can take Cole, but..." "I get it. I'm just going to get him ready," Rachel said, taking the opportunity to apologize. She suspected they were arguing, but she was too far away to make out what they were saying. Not that it was any of her business, after all. The man made a point of irritating her whenever he saw her. Feeling like an intruder, she hesitated, unsure whether to wait and return the dishes later or continue now. The woman stormed off, leaving Kevin standing alone near the gate, his eyes still fixed on the car as it drove away. Kevin ran his hands through his hair in frustration, and as he turned to go back into the house, his eyes met hers. He nodded briefly before going inside. Rachel didn't need any further prompting to decide to postpone delivering the dishes to Elaine until another time. She wondered why Kevin's eyes flashed with anger, seeming more intense than the emotion itself. 2 days later, Rachel could no longer avoid going to Elaine's house. Cole brought questions about Elaine, whom he now saw as a grandmother. She knocked twice before the door opened, and the little girl she had seen earlier stood before her, smiling. "Hi, I'm Anna," the girl said. Rachel couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. It was then that she saw Elaine standing behind Anna. "I haven't seen you in a while." "This is Anna, Kevin's daughter," Elaine said. Rachel's smile froze as she processed the introduction. She hadn't expected it, but it explained the uncanny resemblance between Kevin and the little girl. Before, she had seen him as rude and annoying, but now, knowing he had a daughter, she began to see him differently. Walking to the kitchen to put the dishes away, she muttered to herself, "Kevin's daughter." "That's right, my girl," Elaine said. Rachel turned to see Kevin standing in the doorway, looking at her with amusement. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "Wow, I didn't know you were a dad," she said, looking away. Kevin raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises." Rachel muttered to herself as she walked over to him. "You're so rude and intimidating." He placed his hand on the doorframe, blocking her path. "Rude and intimidating? That's not exactly the kind of language I'd use to describe myself." "Well, you have to admit you can be a little scary sometimes." "Scary? Me? Never." She couldn't help but laugh, clapping her hand over her mouth. "Oh, come on. You're like a big, tough firefighter. I'm sure you have a soft spot in there somewhere. Don't get any ideas about me being soft, you know? I'm all tough and rough around the edges." "Yeah, right. That's why you have such a cute daughter who looks so much like you, a total softie." Kevin's face turned red and he looked away, muttering under his breath, "Shut up, Rachel." "What's wrong, fireman? Can't handle a little teasing?" Rachel laughed. Elaine patted her son's arm, making him reluctantly pull away. "Enough playing around, you two. Kevin, why don't you take Rachel and Cole to the park with Anna? She doesn't want to be alone." Kevin started to protest, but stopped halfway. "I can take Cole, but..." "I get it. I'm just going to get him ready," Rachel said, taking the opportunity to apologize. They sat together, sharing the food that Elaine had carefully packed for them. The picnic basket was filled with delicious treats, more than just plain picnic food. It was a real feast. As they ate, Rachel noticed how Kevin interacted with her daughter, the way he listened attentively and made her feel special. She saw the love in his eyes and her heart melted, realizing that the tough, gruff man she had known was completely different when he was with her daughter. After the meal, Kevin suggested a game of tag, and the children squealed with excitement. Rachel joined in, laughing and running with the others. For the first time in a long time, she was able to laugh without feeling sad. As the sun set over the horizon, they walked back to the car, exhausted but happy. Rachel turned to Kevin and sighed dramatically. "Thanks for today. I had a great time." "Rachel, I'm glad you enjoyed it," Kevin replied. The children were asleep by the time they got into the car, exhausted from playing so much. Kevin put on another of her favorite songs from the band, and this time, Rachel stared out the window, lost in thoughts about the memories the music brought back. She remembered how her father used to lock her in her room when she was a fan of the band, just so she could read. She would sneak out the window, making her father worry the whole time. If only she could go back in time, just to be in his arms again. She remembered how she would cry, and he would tell her silly jokes to make her laugh. The car suddenly stopped, making Rachel wince. "Are we home yet?" she asked. Kevin just smiled, opening the side of the door and carrying Cole. "Wait here. I'll put you to bed quickly." She watched as the tall, muscular man gently carried Cole before reaching for the key. Rachel found herself smiling as he walked into the house, and she waited in the car. Not wanting to wake Anna, she got out of the car, closing the door softly. "My imaginary character is a world-class wrestler," she said jokingly, clenching her fists. The two laughed together, and she gave Kevin a smile as she headed inside the house as well. Just as she was about to enter, he shouted something, but she couldn't make out the words. Later, as she got ready for bed, Rachel set everything up the way she wanted, including a hot bath that helped her relax. Rachel realized what he had said and gasped. "Don't be so hasty, Rachel. Maybe you didn't hear me right," she whispered to herself, pulling the covers over her head as if that would stop the thoughts in her mind. But it wasn't until her eyes were about to close, surrendering to sleep, that she smiled, remembering Kevin telling her she looked prettier. In the months that followed, there were frequent picnics and birthday parties, but Kevin didn't repeat what he had said that night, and she didn't bother to ask. Maybe it was for the best. One Thursday night, Rachel decided to stop by Elaine's house to talk. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She tried to call out, "Elaine, are you there?" But only silence answered. Rachel's heart began to race as she tried the doorknob, finding it unlocked. She opened the door and called for Elaine, hoping no one had broken in. She picked up the phone and dialed Elaine's number. "Elaine, where are you?" "I'm at your house and there's no one here," she said, trying to sound calm. Elaine's response was a sob. "Rachel, we're at St. Michael's Hospital. Anna, she's so sick." "What's going on? How sick is she?" Rachel asked, Elaine's cries growing louder. "She needs a kidney transplant. The doctors say it's the only way to save her life." Rachel's world stopped. She felt like she'd been punched in the gut. "I'm on my way," she said, rushing home to instruct Cole to stay home while she ran to the car. Her heart was racing as she sped toward the hospital, Elaine's sobs echoing in her mind. Rachel burst into the hospital lobby, her eyes searching desperately for Elaine and Kevin. Spotting them huddled together, she ran, her heels clicking on the floor. "Elaine, what's going on?" she asked softly. Elaine's tear-stained face lifted, her eyes pleading. "Rachel, Anna needs a kidney transplant. The doctors say it's the only way to save her life." Rachel took a deep breath. A kidney transplant, the cost of such a surgery, was astronomical. She knew Elaine and Kevin couldn't afford it alone. "How much time does she have?" she asked again, the wheels clicking in her head. "The doctors said we only have a few weeks to raise the funds." Kevin finally spoke, his voice low and thick with concern. "We've already started a fundraiser, but it's not enough. We're so short on time." Rachel stepped closer, her mind racing with ideas. "We'll find a way. Don't worry. I'll help raise the money. Anna will be fine." She knew they would need all the help they could get, and she was determined to do everything she could to save Anna's life. How much time do we have?" Rachel asked, trying to remain calm. "The doctors said we need to raise about $500,000, Elaine replied, her voice shaking. Rachel's heart sank at the amount. It was an astronomical amount, far beyond what could realistically be raised through a simple fundraiser. She knew she had to say something to lift Elaine and Kevin's spirits in this overwhelming moment. "Don't worry," Rachel said, holding Elaine's hands tightly. "We'll figure it out. I'll help raise the funds. We'll get through it." Rachel hated hospitals, especially when it came to situations like this. Back in her day, there had been no one to turn to when her mother had gotten sick. Her father had done everything he could to raise money, but he hadn't been able to do anything to help her get better. But Anna wasn't her mother. The girl would survive this. Rachel shifted her gaze to Kevin, looking at him closely for the first time that day. He looked tired, angry, and frustrated, lost in thought. She put her hand on his knee, trying to reassure him. The big problem was how to come up with that large sum of money in a few weeks. Rachel did her best to mask her shock at hearing the exact amount, because showing desperation wouldn't help anyone. She watched as Kevin began making frantic calls. Hours later, he was pacing the living room, his eyes fixed on the phone, trying to reach his ex-wife, a busy model who never seemed to have time for their daughter. His frustration grew with each failed attempt. Finally, Kevin slumped into a chair, his head in his hands, and Rachel knew she had to act. "Hey," she said softly, sitting down next to him. "How's Anna?" Kevin shook his head, his voice cracking. "No change. And I can't even get my ex to return my calls. She's so wrapped up in her own world that she doesn't even care that our daughter is fighting for her life." Rachel put her hand on his arm, trying to calm him. "We'll figure something out, Kevin. We'll get through this together." But Kevin just shook his head, his eyes filling with tears. "I don't know. I just don't know." She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly as he let out a sob. Rachel held him for a few moments, letting him cry out his frustration and worry. Then she gently pulled away and looked him in the eyes. "I'll go get Cole," she said, determined to find a solution to save Anna. Ready for bed, Rachel stood up and gave Kevin one last look. "I'll go get Cole, but I'll be right back, okay? We'll get through this together." Kevin nodded, his eyes still wet with tears. Rachel gave him a soft smile before leaving the hospital room. Later that night, she tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Watching Kevin cry had been heartbreaking. She had rarely seen men cry in her life, and it made her understand his pain even more. If she had been in Kevin's shoes, she would probably have been just as devastated. Finally, she fell asleep, but her sleep was fitful and restless. The next morning, Rachel woke up feeling groggy and exhausted. She mechanically got ready to take Cole to school, but her mind was elsewhere, worried about Elaine, Kevin, and little Anna. The days passed, and Rachel's anxiety only grew. She visited Anna every day, but the little girl's condition remained the same. Anna lay in her hospital bed, hooked up to machines and wires, her eyes sunken and her skin pale. Kevin and Elaine were ever present, tireless in their vigil. A week passed, and Rachel felt as if she were trapped in a nightmare. Anna's condition was not improving, and the medical bills continued to pile up. Rachel knew she had to take action, but she didn't know how, and it made her anxious. The next morning, in an attempt to distract herself, Rachel decided to clean the attic. Dust accumulated over time flew everywhere as she lifted old trunks and boxes. She coughed, waving her hand in front of her face as she picked up an old suitcase. The cloud of dust made her sneeze repeatedly. After setting the suitcase down, she wiped her hands on her shorts and coughed again before lifting the lid. A faint smell of old leather wafted out, and her eyes widened when she saw carefully organized files and an envelope addressed to her. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized her father's handwriting. With trembling fingers, Rachel unfolded the letter. The paper was yellowed and the ink faded, indicating that it had been there for a long time. Her eyes filled with tears as she read her father's note. She had missed him so much since he passed away. Seeing the letter made her cry. "Dear Rachel," the letter began. Her father's familiar, curvy handwriting filled the letter. "If you are reading this, it means you have made the wise decision to keep the house, despite its age and the memories it holds. I know it was not easy." Rachel paused, a tear rolling down her cheek. Her father had been gone for years, but his presence felt so close at that moment. He continued, "I was not able to give you much while I was here, overwhelmed by my own limitations and the demands of life. But know this. Every day I tried to put a little aside, hoping that one day it might help you when I could no longer." At the bottom of the letter, in shaky letters, was a phone number. "Call this number," he wrote, "for Mr. Thompson. He knows about the small investments I have made. They are not much, but I hope they can help you in some way." Taking a deep breath, Rachel wiped her eyes and folded the letter carefully, placing it on the table beside her. Her mind wandered to Kevin and Elaine in the hospital, facing their own trials. The family bond seemed stronger than ever, a thread weaving through their separate struggles, uniting them in spirit, if not in presence. Gathering her resolve, Rachel picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Hello," she introduced herself, her voice a mix of nervousness and anticipation. There was a brief pause on the line, followed by a heavy, thoughtful sigh. "I've been expecting your call, Rachel," the voice on the other end said. "Your father mentioned you often, always with such pride and hope." The conversation flowed with casual updates, but as the pleasantries faded, a subtle change came over Mr. Thompson's demeanor. His voice, once bright with reminiscence, took on a seriousness that caught Rachel's attention. "You might be wondering who I am or how I met your father." He took a deep breath, preparing to continue. "I knew him from a day that could have ended tragically for my family. My son nearly drowned in the lake." Rachel's hand went to her mouth, her eyes widening in shock. It was a terrible day," Mr. Thompson continued, "but your father was there. He saved my son's life. I offered him anything, ready to repay him, but he was a humble man. Your father refused any material compensation. I worked in finance all my life, and although your father didn't accept money, he let me help him manage the little he chose to invest." He paused, making sure Rachel was following along. "Your father sent small amounts whenever he could. Over the decades, I managed those investments as best I could to ensure the best returns." Rachel listened to every word, weaving in a new layer of understanding about the man her father was and the legacy he left behind. "Did you see the papers in the envelope?" Mr. Thompson's voice brought her back to the present. Rachel nodded, remembering the thick envelope she hadn't yet fully examined. "They're all in your name. Stocks, bonds, other investments." Mr. Thompson's eyes lit up with a hint of pride. "You might want to call your financial advisor to confirm, but last time I checked, you're a millionaire." Rachel's hands shook slightly as she processed the magnitude of Mr. Thompson's words. A mixture of gratitude and admiration washed over her as she realized the depth of her father's foresight and Mr. Thompson's loyalty. "Thank you," she managed, her voice thick with emotion. "I had no idea." As they continued to talk, Rachel felt a deep connection to her past, coupled with the unexpected possibilities of her future, all thanks to two men from different worlds brought together by a moment of crisis and a lifetime of gratitude. The first thing that came to mind when she heard about the money was Anna's treatment. The plan to clean out the attic was forgotten as she rushed downstairs, grabbing her keys without even bothering to change her clothes. Her heart was racing as she raced to the hospital, the news burning a hole in her pocket. She couldn't wait to share with Kevin and Elaine that Anna's treatment would no longer be a financial burden. Her father had taken care of it from beyond the grave. Rachel burst through the hospital doors, her determination palpable. "I'm here to help with the costs of treatment," she declared without hesitation. Elaine and Kevin sat in the waiting room, Kevin alert with concern. He gave her a weak smile. "That's very kind of you, Rachel, but you don't have to," Kevin began. "Actually, I'll cover everything," she interrupted, Kevin's expression changing to one of confusion, his brows furrowing. "Everything," he echoed, clearly intrigued. Rachel laughed lightly, the sound echoing in the busy hospital hallway. "Yes, everything. Let me explain," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "This afternoon, while I was cleaning out the attic, I found something incredible." Kevin, still lost in his own worries, didn't seem to understand her meaning. He blinked, the stress lines around his eyes deepening. "I found out I'm a millionaire now," Rachel continued, her voice filled with a mix of amazement and joy at the revelation. Kevin's eyes widened dramatically, a mix of shock and disbelief taking over his face. "A millionaire?" he stammered, his voice a mix of doubt and hope. "Yes," Rachel confirmed, nodding enthusiastically. "Thanks to some investments my father made a long time ago, I can afford it." "Kevin, I want to help." Kevin's initial skepticism slowly turned to relief, his body visibly relaxing as the weight of financial worries began to lift. "I don't even know what to say, Rachel." "Thank you," Kevin managed, his voice cracking with emotion. Rachel reached out, squeezing his hand gently. "You don't have to say anything. I'm glad I could do this for you and your family." When they reached the hospital's administrative office, Rachel pushed open the door with determination, catching the receptionist's attention. "I'm here to settle Anna Johnson's bills," she announced, touching Kevin, who was still in shock. The receptionist looked up, surprised by their sudden arrival. "Oh, yeah, let me check," she said, typing on the computer. Her eyes widened when she saw the amount due. "Okay, that's a significant amount. Would you like to pay by card or?" Rachel interrupted, pulling out her checkbook. "I'll write you a check. How much do I need to pay?" The receptionist's eyes flicked to the amount on the screen. "It's $517,000. Rachel didn't hesitate as she wrote the check, wanting to get this over with quickly, as long as Anna's life was saved. When she handed over the check, the receptionist's eyes widened in surprise. "Thank you so much, Miss Rachel," she said, quickly processing the payment, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Within minutes, the bills were paid and Anna's treatment secured. Rachel could finally relax as tears threatened to fall from her eyes. "It's done," she whispered. Kevin wrapped her in a tight hug, not caring where they were. "Thank you, Rachel," he murmured in her ear, still holding her tightly. "Thank you for saving Anna's life." As the days passed, Anna's health began to blossom. Her treatment was aggressive but effective, and she slowly regained her strength. Her smile returned, bringing relief to everyone. Rachel visited her every day with Cole, watching with joy as Anna's progress blossomed. Kevin was always by her side, and they would sit together, holding Anna's hands. Cole was always eager to see Anna, carrying all her favorite toys and sitting patiently beside her while she slept. Only sleep could tear him away from the room. One day, as Anna slept, Rachel watched the scene with a heart full of hope and gratitude. She knew that despite the hardships, they were all together, and that made all the difference. Peacefully, Kevin turned to Rachel. "You did this. You saved her life." His eyes spoke louder than his words, expressing eternal gratitude and a promise to always pay it forward. The day Anna was finally released to go home was a true celebration. Elaine, Kevin, Cole, Anna, and Rachel decided to celebrate with chicken and fries, Anna's favorite dish. "Thank you, Rachel. I never thought I'd be here, smiling like this." "I'll always be in your debt," Elaine said, holding Rachel's hand as the kids discussed football with Kevin. "I was in your debt first, Elaine. You welcomed my son and me like we were family," Rachel replied, squeezing Elaine's hand and smiling. When she turned her attention back to everyone, she noticed Kevin watching her, his gaze full of admiration. Rachel stared out the window, lost in thought, her eyes falling on the diamond ring on her finger. A soft smile spread across her face as she remembered the day Kevin proposed to her. Her heart skipped a beat when he got down on one knee. Their relationship blossomed quickly and they became inseparable, exploring the city hand in hand, laughing together. There was never a moment when she doubted his love. Kevin was the only one skeptical, worried that she would think he wanted her for her money, just like her ex-husband. As they exchanged vows at the altar, Rachel knew she had found her soulmate. Their honeymoon was spent renovating both their homes, exploring new restaurants, and caring for 2 children. Kevin initially wanted to move on, but Rachel knew it was best to stay close to Elaine, who was overjoyed with the presence of her grandchildren, always busy doting on them. Elaine took her grandchildren to social events and bought them books at every opportunity. Rachel was deeply grateful to her father. Even in death, he still provided her with comfort. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she had never gone to the attic that day. One day, Rachel stood nervously in the entrance of a busy restaurant, her eyes searching for a waiter to show her to a table. Suddenly, a familiar, sarcastic voice pierced the air. "Well, look who's here." It was John, her ex-husband, standing smugly next to a young woman. "Are you our waiter today?" John teased mockingly before letting out a forced laugh. He continued, "Still living in that old house you inherited from your father?" Before Rachel could respond, her heart pounding in her chest, Kevin came out of the bathroom, his brows furrowed as he took in the scene, his wife looking distressed and a stranger laughing beside her. Instinctively, Kevin knew it was John. With a protective look, he walked over to John and pushed him firmly aside. "Is there a problem here?" he asked Rachel, his voice calm but authoritative. John, taken aback by Kevin's size and presence, tried to stand his ground. "You have a problem?" he retorted, trying to mask his intimidation. Kevin's firm, unwavering stance caused John's confidence to visibly diminish. When Kevin extended his arm to Rachel, inviting her to step away from the unpleasant encounter, John's arrogance quickly dissolved into a nervous laugh. He looked from Kevin to Rachel, realizing that the situation had changed drastically. "No problem here," John muttered, stepping back and joining the equally uncomfortable-looking young woman. "I thought so," Kevin commented as Rachel watched the exchange with a growing sense of relief and reassurance. Rachel's heart raced as she watched Kevin handle the situation with such poise and calm. Her love for him deepened with each passing moment, not only for the immediate protection he had offered, but for the constant outpouring of support and kindness that had strengthened their life together. Amidst the hustle and bustle of the busy restaurant, with the clink of dishes and the murmur of conversation, Rachel felt a deep gratitude for everything that had led her to this moment. She silently thanked her father, not only for the tangible legacy he had left, but for the intangible lessons of kindness and love he had imparted, especially to those who truly deserved it. As she held Kevin's hand and felt the warmth of his touch, Rachel felt a powerful affirmation of her choices and the journey she had traveled. In that restaurant, under the soft glow of the lights, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be, loved, valued, and deeply protected.